Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Monday, October 14th. What is up, everybody? At the time of recording this podcast, we are exactly 8 days away from the 2024-2025 NBA season. I am absolutely fired up, man. But as you can tell by the title of this episode, before we can get into the regular season content, I did just want to put a bow on the off-season series we started a couple months ago at this point, ranking the top 10 players at each position. Today we will be ranking the top 10 big men in the NBA, which is a very exciting list if I do say so myself, so hopefully you guys will enjoy that. But just know I'm already scheming about the next podcast. That should be coming either this upcoming Sunday or next Monday, exactly a week from today. That way I do get that out before the regular season opener between the Knicks and the Celtics. That being said, in that podcast, you can expect all of my NBA awards picks for this upcoming season. I'll go through my top 8 seeds or maybe even top 10 seeds in each conference, go through the full playoff picture, my predictions there, and then finally give you my NBA finals pick during this preseason process. So that'll be coming next week. That's always a really fun pod to record, so definitely looking forward to that. But before we can get there, we do have a couple news and notes before we rank the top 10 big men in the NBA. So over the past week, not a ton is going on. I can't lie to you. I haven't been super dialed in on the preseason. With 82 games in the regular season, I just can't get behind forcing myself to watch a bunch of preseason action as well. I've seen the highlights, and I actually saw there were some headlines for a preseason game last night between the Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. That might ring a few bells because we did just break down the Karl-Anthony Towns trade on my last podcast, of course, between the Knicks and the Wolves. And they faced off last night in the preseason. And so I was kind of expecting like nothing to really unfold, like as far as any drama or anything like that. Figured that would probably maybe boil over the first time those two teams meet in the regular season. But these wounds are still fresh, man. It was been like 2 weeks? It really has not been a lot of time since Dante DiVincenzo was on the Knicks, as well as Karl Towns being on the Wolves. You guys get the full picture there. But the reason the preseason game was interesting was, first of all, Randall's still dealing with the shoulder issue, so he is not playing in the preseason. Not sure if he's going to be ready for opening night or what, but he didn't play. But DiVincenzo did play. Towns did play. Honestly, didn't watch the game, but I was informed on the drama because there were some words exchanged during the game between Dante DiVincenzo and what appeared to be Tom Thibodeau, coach of the Knicks. And then we later found out there was an altercation after the game between Dante DiVincenzo and Rick Brunson, the father of Jalen Brunson, of course, and of course, an assistant coach of the New York Knicks. And so there's a whole thing on Twitter that I retweeted from the podcast Twitter at Words with Wallace. Worldwide Wob on Twitter did break that down. He's the best for all you NBA nerds like myself. I'm sure you probably already follow that guy, but he did like a whole investigation into it. But it seems like it's like a really messy situation with the Knicks because Brunson and DiVincenzo are like best friends. Obviously, they played together in college, played together the past couple of years with the Knicks. And now it's kind of awkward because there seems to be some beef between Jalen's dad and Dante DiVincenzo. Maybe Dante suggesting part of the reason he was dealt out was because of the doing of Rick Brunson. You guys are just going to have to check out the video that I retweeted and see for yourself. But that was pretty funny. I didn't expect much to come of preseason basketball headlines, but this league is very dramatic, as we know. So felt the need to at least address that a little bit. And then finally, I have been watching the Starting Five documentary on Netflix. I'm still only 2 or 3 episodes in at this point, so haven't really given my full thoughts on it. I'll save that for when I complete the series. But it's the same premise as the Netflix documentaries they've been doing for the quarterback position, the receiver position, and now they're doing a Starting Five series that follows around Jason Tatum, Anthony Edwards, LeBron James, Domantas Sabonis, and Jimmy Butler, all during last season. So I'm obviously looking forward to the last few episodes when we can watch Tatum win that title. Not sure how much playoff content they're even going to have in that mix, but I'm very excited to watch. It's been pretty entertaining so far, but again, I will reserve my thoughts on that until I finish the series. But so far, it's pretty interesting. If you guys are real NBA nerds like myself and are just looking for something to watch within the next week until the season actually starts off, I must say I give it a recommendation. And now let's just dive right into the rankings, man. The big man list. This should be a relatively quick podcast. You guys kind of get the premise of this. I'm not ranking these players based on their trade value per se. I'm not really taking age or how much money they make into account when I'm building this list. I'm obviously just ranking the top 10 players at the big man position that I'd want on my team heading into this upcoming NBA season. And it's a pretty loaded list. This list got significantly better. Not to spoil anything, we did have a really strong big man class from the rookies last year that definitely affected a bit of this list. So before we get into the top 10, let's just kind of go through some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. Jared Allen had another really strong season for the Cavs. Rudy Gobert, you can always put him in that conversation after winning what? Like is this his fourth defensive player of the year? Maybe even his fifth. It's crazy. Even though Gobert, obviously a fantastic defensive player, couldn't quite get there on this list. Evan Mobley is actually a guy I had number 10 on my list last year. He did not make the cut. He had another injury-riddled campaign. He did have some really awesome moments, especially coming in the playoffs without Jared Allen being in the picture. Mobley was forced to be more of a traditional five and definitely excelled a little bit more offensively in that role. But that being said, he just hasn't really put it all together yet for Mobley, even though he sees the game really well. The outside shot hasn't developed enough. There hasn't been enough of like a true offensive game for him to go to. So couldn't quite get there with Mobley. Jaren Jackson was a guy who was actually number 7 on my list last year. He is now in the honorable mention section after a really rough season from the entire Grizzlies organization. He did kind of excel offensively, and it will be interesting to see if Jaren Jackson can, kind of show the same level of offensive prowess he had this past season once Ja and Desmond Bane are back in the fold this upcoming season. He averaged, I believe, a career high in points per game, but the blocks were way down. The rebounds were way down. So it was kind of unique. He just played a different role for the Grizzlies. And honestly, I just wasn't all that impressed with what I saw from Jaren Jackson Jr. last year. Another guy who it breaks my heart to have in the honorable mention section is, of course, my guy Kristaps Porzingis for the Boston Celtics. He would be number 12 on my list if you were to rank him out. And really, it's just due to injury. Obviously, Kristaps got banged up in the playoffs, came back against the Mavericks and hurt himself again, and now it required surgery. He's not going to be back for the Celtics until probably at least Christmas at this point in time. So just because I do definitely value durability and these guys playing in as many games as possible when I'm putting together this list, I couldn't quite get there for Kristaps, but I do believe he is still very talented. It's a loaded list, but I still think he would be in the top 10 if he was fully healthy. But because we have to take health into account, he is at number 12. But I do expect him to still be a really big X factor for the Celtics when he returns this season. And then finally, my number 11 spot, the first cut on this list. This went to Chet Holmgren of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Really flip-flopping between him and the guy I ultimately landed at number 10 on this list. But I just couldn't quite get there with Chet. I think that he had a really awesome rookie season. There was even a time during the beginning parts of last season when it actually looked like, I believe, he might have even been the odds-on favorite for Rookie of the Year for probably about 3 weeks there before Wemby really took over, which is just kind of hilarious that we can look back and think that Wemby at one point wasn't the favorite for Rookie of the Year. What an awesome bet that must have been. Not a huge betting guy, not really easy for me to do here in Texas, but man, that would have been a layup bet if you guys were able to capitalize in that moment when Chet was the favorite. But again, Wemby's a very special player we're going to talk more about in a little bit. But Chet had a really awesome rookie season in his own right. Obviously, the ability for him to immediately step in and be a stretch five, shoot the ball really efficiently from three, despite his slight frame, be a really solid rim protector, and overall just have really good feel on the court. It'll be interesting to see how Chet's role changes a bit this upcoming season with the addition of Isaiah Hartenstein in the offseason. More of a traditional center, obviously, certainly somebody with a bit more size on him. And so I'd imagine Hartenstein comes off the bench and they don't totally disrupt the lineup that they had going last year. But I still think depending on the matchup, if they are playing a big team like a Minnesota or maybe a Denver, they decide to just give Hartenstein the nod and they play Chet at the 4. It'll be interesting to see how Chet kind of adapts his game, because regardless of what that starting lineup ends up being, there's going to be many moments during the regular season in which those two bigs share the court together, and Chet's going to have to be the one to adjust and be more of a traditional stretch 4 in that sense. And I think he's definitely up for the challenge, but it is, he's a very young player, so guys could struggle with that. It is still super impressive that after missing his entire rookie season that he played in all 82 games for the Thunder last year. So they're absolutely loving that pick. Chet is a stud. He could make me look pretty silly by leaving him off this list, but I just couldn't quite get there for him in the top 10. So let's move on and talk about the official list, where we start at number 10 with my guy, Alfred Sengun of the Houston Rockets. If you guys remember on our Real Words with Wallace listeners, you guys might remember my Guys episode I did last year where I just highlighted basically a player at each position that I felt like I was way higher than consensus on. And Sengun was one of those guys, and that pick definitely made me look smart. They didn't all make me look smart. But Sengun was dominant for the Rockets last year before suffering a pretty tough leg injury. He averaged 21 points per game, 9 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and honestly just looked like a baby Jokic out there. I mean, I know that people are going to give that comparison when it's not deserved, but I think if anybody, there's really only one other person in the league that you can at least see the resemblance in their games, and I feel like Sengun is that guy for the Rockets right now. Just sees the game incredibly well from the low post, just an incredible facilitator, incredible playmaker. He's a beast on the boards. Sneaky athlete too, dare I say it? Like he's put some guys on posters, and so I just love watching Şengün. There's definitely an argument to be made that like, hey, the best run of the Rockets season actually came when Şengün was banged up toward the end of the regular season after suffering a pretty crazy leg injury that he has made a full recovery from, by the way. But still, people are saying, hey, maybe that just led to the success of Jalen Green being able to cook a little bit more and open things up for the Rockets. They were able to go small ball. Maybe. I think we need to see a little bit larger sample size before we just make the conclusion that the Rockets are better without Şengün. But regardless, even if he's not the best fit in Houston, he's an extremely talented player. Really one of only a handful of guys in the NBA that has that type of skill set. And I just think he sees the game incredibly well, for especially for somebody that's only 22 years old. He's actually the same age as Chet. People just don't really think of him as that young, but he is entering his fourth season in the NBA. So big fan of Alperen Şengün at number 10. Moving on to number 9, a guy we just talked about quite a bit on the last episode. This is where I have Karl-Anthony Towns, now of the New York Knicks. So, said before, like Towns' statistical peak was probably about like 5 or 6 years ago at this point during like the 1920 season, in which he was like more like 27 points a game and like 12 11 rebounds a game, in that range. Like his numbers have definitely come down a bit the past couple years, but in large part that's because he's now was effectively playing the power forward position in Minnesota after they picked up Rudy Gobert a couple years ago. But you have to give Towns a lot of credit. He's still an extremely talented offensive player, just like we talked about on the last episode. Even though the stats came down, he was still a huge part of the Wolves playoffs run. You know, he's an extremely talented shooter. He calls himself the best shooting big man of all time. I'm never going to be able to get there on that. I always think of Dirk when you think of the greatest shooting big man of all time, even though he's hit less three-pointers and probably shoots a worse percentage. Like the degree of difficulty that was all the shots that Dirk took and like the different ways he could create his shot just really separates him from Karl-Anthony Towns just taking a bunch of spot up threes. So I'm always going to give credit to Dirk. And honestly, if Dirk played in this modern era, it'd be foolish for him to not be shooting like, 5-6 threes a game at least, with how talented of a shooter Dirk was, all spots on the floor. I'm sure Kevin Durant, if you want to consider him a big man, considering he's actually like probably the same height as Karl Towns, you'd have to give him the nod over Towns. But regardless, Towns still is in that conversation as one of the greatest shooting big men of all time. Fantastic rebounder, a big body. I'm excited to see what he does with the Knicks because, again, I do think we're going to see his stats take a pretty big bump upwards going back to the center position. And he's just a really valuable player. I think if you were to pick nits, you just have to talk about like the mental makeup of the guy and the decisions he makes, always getting himself in foul trouble, always making low basketball IQ plays from time to time. I really don't know how else to describe it. Like Wolves fans might think I'm being too critical of their guy here, but like you can't deny like the IQ just wasn't quite on the same level as basically every other big man that we're talking about on this list. And he's been in the league for quite some time. He's 28 years old. Like it probably just is who Towns is at this point in time. So you know what you're getting. He's still a stat sheet stuffer, still a really fantastic shooter and a big body that can space the floor like that. The Knicks are very lucky to have him. Moving on to number 8 on my list, this is where I have Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. A guy that I just mentioned in the intro is on that Starting Five documentary on Netflix. Kind of funny that Sabonis made the cut. Like personality-wise, he's definitely very different than the other 4 guys on there. But I'm sure some of that was intended by the producers of the documentary. And maybe on the other hand, maybe he was just like the 15th guy that they asked, and then he was just kind of filling that last spot. Regardless, seems like a pretty good dude from what I've seen in the series, and he's a fantastic player, right? He's on this list for a reason. He's extremely talented, and you want to talk about a stat sheet stuffer, you got to talk about Sabonis. Actually organizing a little fantasy basketball league with some of my friends from back home, and so I'm excited for that draft tomorrow night. And I can personally assure you that Domantas Sabonis should absolutely be a first-round pick for those fantasy basketball nerds out there because he's a monster. Last year, he averaged 19 points a game, nearly 14 rebounds a game, and 8 assists. Defensively, he wasn't, contributing a ton in the stat sheet there. Almost a steal a game and about half a block a game as well. Doesn't shoot a ton of threes. And so as much as I think Sabonis is extremely talented, I just love how hard that guy plays too. Like, he is so damn physical. Like, if you're an undersized team, like Sabonis is going to try to put his shoulder into your chest every single time and punish you down low. And there's just not a lot of guys that are cut from that cloth that play the game the way that he does. And so I definitely enjoy watching him. Obviously, again, the 8 assists a game, you see that, how well he sees the floor. He is definitely one of the main 2 factors that makes the Kings engine go. I think Fox is obviously right up there as well. The issues I have with Sabonis is like maybe I just like can't get this out of my head, like how tough he was to watch during that first round series against the Warriors a couple years ago. Like, And again, that could be being unfair to Sabonis because he's playing one of the smartest teams of all time with just coming off of, the back end of a dynasty here. They're obviously very familiar with how Sabonis plays, being in the same division as the Sacramento Kings. And so maybe just like the Warriors, like you just kind of have to put that to the side. But like the way Draymond and Kevon Looney just made Sabonis look really silly, just kind of taking him off the glass, forcing him to shoot jumpers that he wasn't comfortable shooting. Maybe he was still feeling the effects of a wrist injury at that point in time, but he was just really tough in that series, and it kind of gave me the ick, so to speak, with Sabonis. Like, I just can't really get there for him as like a playoff guy at this point in time. I know he's really valuable, but he also just lacks some of the skills that you would kind of want in a modern big man. Like the rim protection isn't quite there. The outside shooting isn't quite there. And so you look at a guy like Chet, where he's definitely not as talented. He's not as good as a scorer. He's not as good of a playmaker, but he spaces the floor a lot better. He protects the rim a lot better. Does OKC, would they rather have Sabonis than Chet? Probably not. They'd probably just be just fine with Chet because he fills the things that most winning teams are looking for. And so it's really tricky because as much as I like Sabonis as a player, he's also part of the reason I never think the Kings are going to get over the hump or be anything serious in the West. It's a loaded Western Conference, and if Sabonis is your best player, your second best player, I just don't ever think I'm going to take you that seriously. And I'm really not trying to come at Sabonis because I like him, but that's just my honest opinion of where he's at as a player. Moving on to number 7 on my list. This is a guy I actually had on like the Wings list last year. This is where I have Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. I absolutely love Lauri Markkanen. He's obviously signed a big time extension to stay in Utah, which, contractually keeps him in Utah for the next several seasons. Realistically, he might end up being on the trade block again once he's legally allowed to be dealt, once like that window closes 6 months after he signed that extension. So effectively, he's going to be on the Jazz for at least this season, and then maybe he'll re-enter trade talks next offseason. But he's a monster player for the Utah Jazz that really broke out not last year, but the season before, and he's strung together 2 really solid campaigns at this point. Last year, he averaged 23 points a game, 8 rebounds, 2 assists a game. Really solid three-point shooter as well, shooting nearly like 39.9% from 3 last season. So I just love the way that Lauri plays. It's pretty amazing that it took like him being on his like 3rd or 4th team before he really broke out with the Jazz. But being 7 foot tall, being able to obviously space the floor at a really high level, and also just the way he attacks the basket. Like, he is such a matchup nightmare, the way that he can just blow by people on the wing and attack people from the perimeter. Like, there's really nobody like him in the modern game where there are 7-footers that are attacking the wing that good. Like, I guess you could put Kevin Durant in that conversation, but anytime you're being compared to Kevin Durant, it's going to sound a little bit ridiculous. And so I just love everything that Markkanen brings to the table. I think that even though Sabonis is a bit better statistically, I think they share similar like defensive concerns where you can probably get away with Lauri Markkanen playing the 5 if you needed him to, but at the same time, you wouldn't love that. He's not exactly a rim protector either. But at the same time, he's just such a talented shooter and scorer. I think he is much more malleable as a basketball player, where Markkanen can be a positive contributor for virtually any team that is trying to win. Sabonis, I don't know if I can say the same thing for sure. That's why there was so many offseason rumors with Lauri Markkanen being of interest for the Warriors and maybe Philadelphia if things didn't work out with Paul George. I mean, any GM with a brain would want a guy like Lauri Markkanen on their team. That's why I'm so high on him. I can't wait to watch him next year for the Jazz. Even if they are kind of like a middling team with not a ton of direction, at least they have a guy that can help sell tickets and be a franchise cornerstone, because that's exactly what Lauri Markkanen has been for the past couple of years. Moving on, we're entering the top 6 now. At my number 6 spot, this is where I have Bam Adebayo of the Miami Heat. He is definitely one of the 2 guys on this list that I would say are real Olympic risers for me. Obviously, being a diehard Celtics fan, as you guys know, I am certainly no fan of the Miami Heat, and, honestly was never really all that scared of Bam Adebayo, at least on the offensive end of the court. Defensively, the dude is an absolute problem, but I was just reminded and actually saw what it was like to root for Bam Adebayo, rooting for Team USA during this past Olympic run. And he was so impressive. Like, it's unbelievable that this guy's only 6'9", because he really does play like he's at least 7 feet tall. And he's also really versatile as well. Just like the way that, a lot of guys out there in the NBA claim that they can guard 1 through 5 at a high level. And the vast majority of the time, that is not even close to being true. I think Bam Adebayo is one of the handful of players in the NBA that can actually guard 1 through 5 at an extremely high level. And just the way his offensive game has developed over the past several years. Like, originally he was more of like a 15 and 8 type of guy. And then just all those numbers have continued to rise as he's added to his game each and every year. He's been more of like a 20 and 10 guy the past couple years. Also sees the floor pretty well, averaging at least 4 assists. And even last year dipped his toe into the three-point shooting a little bit more. You saw him make a couple threes during the Olympic run. He actually shot 36% from three last season. Obviously only shooting like, 1 3 a week basically. So not a ton of attempts there, but maybe he adds to that this season. I know Miami's going to need any sort of offense that they can get. And just with the playoff pedigree as a team of a whole, like Bam is a huge contributor for that. So that being said, I love Bam Adebayo. I think he's a fantastic player. And because of the success he's had in the playoffs, he gets a nod at number 6 for me. Now we're entering the top 5. I do think there's a pretty significant tier jump as we move into the top 5 here, because this is where I have Victor Wembanyama. Honestly, you can make the argument that I'm actually too low on Wemby and that he should at least be up to number 4, maybe even number 3 on this list. I can't quite get there because there's obviously some veterans above Wemby on this list that I just respect a little bit more. But there is no ceiling for what Victor Wembanyama can be. Like statistically last season, even during, like, there was obviously a very weird feeling out period at the beginning of the season, and he went through some highs and some lows. But during his first ever season in the NBA, he averaged 21 points a game, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, nearly 4 blocks a game, and over a steal a game as well. I really can't even describe watching Wemby play. Like every night, you're just like, it seems like he's learning something that he's taking and adding to his bag. Like the defensive highlights are even more ridiculous than the offensive highlights, which are pretty crazy because he has the ability to literally size somebody up off of the dribble, hit a pull-up jumper in transition, like go to the basket and just float over everybody with that wingspan as well. Like it's insane. He's 7'3", maybe even 7'4". There's nobody doing anything that Wemby's doing on a basketball court. And so he's a really difficult person to rank. We do have to keep in mind the Spurs were still definitely a bottom barrel team last year. They're expected to take a massive leap. So I'm interested to see, once I really go through and crunch all the numbers, where I expect them to fall in the Western Conference, because as we know, it's still very talented. But with the additions of Chris Paul, with the draft pick of Stephon Castle, they definitely added a lot more pros into that locker room. And so I think the Spurs are going to be a lot better. I think Wemby's going to take a massive statistical leap. I think he's going to be the odds-on favorite for Defensive Player of the Year if he isn't already. So, again, Wemby's going to be insane this season. If it wasn't just for the pedigree that the guys above him have on this list, like, he would be much higher, and I think when I come back to do this list, he's going to pass at least 1, maybe even 2 of the top 4 on my list currently. So that's where I'm at on Wemby. Moving on to number 4, this is where I have Anthony Davis of the Los Angeles Lakers. Again, went back and forth there for a bit. Definitely can make the argument Wemby should have been in this spot. But, man, Anthony Davis just had such an awesome season last year, and if they weren't the Lakers, I would feel bad for them. Like, that's how good Anthony Davis was last year. Just don't feel like he quite got the recognition that he deserved. Playing in 76 games, I believe, let me just double check. Yeah, that was actually a career high in games played for Anthony Davis. I know, the TNT guys are always going hard on AD, calling him street clothes Davis and whatever. And, for decent reason, like he had played, the previous 3 seasons, like 36 games, 40 games, 54 games, jumps all the way up to 76 last year. And then, has the same statistical output that we could expect. 25 points per game, nearly 13 rebounds a game, nearly 4 assists per game, over 2 blocks per game. Like, he is just such a monster defensively, like truly one of the best rim protectors in the entire NBA. I mean, again, it is so funny that guy early in his career, was really against playing the center position. He didn't think he had the frame for it. He didn't want to be constantly asked to carry that load on the defensive end of the court. And what do you know? He finally embraced that role. He's added a lot of weight to his frame. He's really solid down there. And on both ends of the court, man, he was just fantastic. If you want to think back all the way to that in-season tournament run for the Lakers, which I know sounds kind of funny, that was obviously a time they were in the spotlight, and Anthony Davis was absolutely insane in that championship game over the Pacers. And so there's just been countless games during Davis's career where he completely takes over with a physical presence that you really wouldn't expect from a guy that, again, is only 6'10", even though he plays so much bigger than that. So just with the respect of the polish of Anthony Davis's game on both ends of the court, I couldn't put Wemby above him quite yet. I do expect Wemby to maybe jump past him this upcoming season. But again, that would be a really impressive feat because Anthony Davis is no joke. Frankly, you could even make the argument that Anthony Davis should be top 3 because of the effort he gives you on the defensive end of the court. And of course, we have to think that he is a huge part of that 2020 Lakers championship run as well. Moving on to number 3, though, this is ultimately where I gave the nod to Joel Embiid. Tough season last year for Embiid, coming off of an MVP season the year prior. Only played in 39 games during the regular season, but we must talk about the fact that before he suffered that knee injury that kept him out most of the regular season, he was on an absolutely ridiculous pace. 35 points per game, 11 rebounds, nearly 6 assists, a couple blocks per game as well. We know what Embiid is at this point, right? It's just a matter of how many games is he actually going to play? How much is he going to have left in the tank at the end of a really close and competitive game? Those are really the only questions that Embiid is yet to answer. And then ultimately, of course, how is he going to perform in the playoffs? Because there's still some uncertainty there, to say the least. I certainly can't put him in the top 2, but the offensive talent of Embiid is undeniable. Like, just the way that he is able to just tear guys apart with just like elbow jumpers. Obviously, the foul baiting, I'd be remiss to not mention how often he's able to get to the line. 88% from the line is ridiculous. And so he truly is one of the most talented big man in NBA history, especially when it comes to scoring the ball. 33 points per game during his MVP campaign, 35 points per game last year. It's just ridiculous, some of the stuff that Embiid's going to do. And I have to admit, like, I was actually thinking about giving my fictional vote to Wemby for Defensive Player of the Year last year. And I thought back to that game where Embiid had like 70 points and he put up the vast majority of those points on Wemby's head. It just shows you Wemby's going to be great. That much is for certain, but there's levels to this stuff, right? Embiid certainly just has like a level of polish to his offensive game that not many people in the history of the game can say that they have. So as much as he is frustrating to watch, as much as I am not a fan of his game, I must admit that he definitely belongs at number 3 on this list. It is worth noting that within like the past 24 hours, there was an interview that came out where Embiid said he doesn't expect to play in back-to-backs for probably the rest of his career. So it does sound like, you could spin that negatively and be like, wow, what a baby. Like, there's so many other massive players throughout the course of NBA history that didn't have to constantly be worrying about load management the way that Joel Embiid is. But on the other hand, you can spin it through a positive lens and say, look, is this a year that he's finally going to come into the season in shape? Is this going to be the year that he finally prioritizes his health and being 100% in April and May over regular season awards and accolades? Who knows? I'm sure Sixers fans would probably like to argue the latter, but we're not really going to know until this season gets going. Next, we have to talk about the number 2 spot on my list, and this is where I have Giannis, of course, of the Milwaukee Bucks. I feel like people are forgetting just how damn good Giannis is. And it's not even like he's been like not durable per se, right? Like, he still played like the past 3 seasons. He played 67 games and 63 games. Last year he played in 73 games, which is all great. The issue is that he's had really untimely injuries, right? Both of the injuries that he's suffered the past couple of years have come right during the playoffs. He missed the entirety of the first round series against the Pacers last year, which is the main reason that the Bucks ended up losing to the Pacers in that series. The year before, he was certainly less than 100% when the Bucks dropped that first round series to the Miami Heat. And so it's just been a little bit since we saw Giannis really dominating in the playoffs at a high level. But during the regular season, I'm not sure if there's anybody in the NBA that works harder than this guy on a night-to-night basis, especially when we're talking about superstars in this league. And this guy knows how to dominate both ends of the court and certainly fill up a box score as well. Last year, it's the same statistical dominance that we saw from Giannis the previous few years. 30 points per game, nearly 12 rebounds per game, nearly 7 assists per game as well, which was a career high for Giannis. That's something that Doc Rivers talked about as well, was just like the insane playmaking chops of Giannis and how he's continued to add to his game each and every season. On the defensive end of the court, averaging a block a game and a steal a game as well. Like, just end to end, this guy, even in the preseason, I saw the highlights of him just like pinning LeBron on like a fast break dunk, going all out effort, like diving into the first row. I'm sure Bucks fans were like borderline upset when they saw that. I mean, it was really cool that it was LeBron and whatnot that he pinned, but it's like, dude, relax. Like, we need you in April. This is literally October. The season hasn't even started yet. Like, why are you going all out like that? And it's because the guy has one gear. He has one speed. It's max effort all the time with Giannis. You got to love that. As a personality, he's just like one of my favorite people in the entire NBA. I love watching the Bucks mainly because of just Giannis. And so really excited to see what he's able to do this upcoming season because the Bucks are flying under the radar. Finally, the number 1 spot on this list, and my number 1 player in the entire NBA. This should not be a big surprise. This is where I have Nikola Jokic, of course, of the Denver Nuggets. What is there left to say about Jokic, a 3-time MVP winner, including the MVP award last season, of course? 26 points per game, 12 rebounds, 9 assists. He's just a maestro. There's really no other way to describe it. Like, the entire Denver offense, which has always been one of the best offenses in the league with this version of Jokic that we've seen over the past couple seasons, everything runs through him. He is their point guard. He is their go-to, we need a basket in the clutch. He is there making everybody else around him so much better. He is like literally the ship that lifts all tides in the entire NBA. Like, there's going to be many other people and many other big men that we see over the next decade that really try to emulate this guy's game, and they're never going to do it quite the way that he does, right? I think even defensively, he's gotten a little bit better, playing high levels of basketball deep into the playoffs like he has the past couple seasons. I think the only questions that you can have about the Denver Nuggets, none of them are about Jokic, right? It's all about the supporting cast. Have they lost too many pieces of that 2023 championship team? That remains to be seen. But what we do know that we're going to get from Jokic is nearly a triple-double every single night. Insane efficiency. He's going to break every single advanced stat on the market. He's going to break, and he's just due for some of the most ridiculous highlights that we're ever going to see. So I can't wait to watch Jokic. Denver is always one of my top league pass teams. We'll see if they end up being my pick coming out of the West, because I do think they got a little bit worse this offseason. But if anybody's able to figure out the Westbrook dynamic and figure out some of the young pieces that need developing, Jokic is going to be a huge help with that as well. So that's going to do it for my list. Let's just quickly recap the top 10. At number 10, I had Şengün. Number 9, Towns. Number 8, Sabonis. Number 7, Markkanen. Number 6, Bam Adebayo. Number 5, Wemby. Number 4, Anthony Davis. Number 3, Joel Embiid. Number 2, Giannis. And number 1, Nikola Jokic. Last year, my list at number 10, I had Mobley. At 9, I had Kristaps. 8, Towns. 7, I had Jaren Jackson Jr., so he's probably the biggest faller. Number 6 last year, I had Sabonis. Number 5 was Bam. And my top 4 remain the exact same with Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid, Giannis, and Jokic. So that is going to do it for this episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I will be back next week, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, going through my full 2024-2025 NBA season preview, in which I give out all of my NBA award predictions, all of my NBA award picks, all of my predictions for the regular season and play-in standings, and then finally my NBA Finals matchup. So expect that to come next Sunday or Monday. And before I let you guys go, be sure to follow At Words with Wallace on everything. That includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Also on social media, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Be sure to follow and support all my content there. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.